Why married women are the ultimate temptation, and they don't even know it. The hidden truth about married women and temptation. Most people don't set out to destroy their own lives, but destruction rarely comes in the form of one big obvious mistake. It happens in small, nearly imperceptible steps. Tiny decisions that seem harmless at first, but over time lead to choices that can never be undone. And when it comes to married women, there is a brutal, unspoken truth that most men don't see. A truth that makes them the easiest prey, not because they are weak, not because they lack morals, but because human nature is wired for temptation. No woman wakes up one day and decides, "Today, I'm going to betray everything I've built." It never happens that way. Instead, it begins in moments so subtle, so seemingly insignificant, that even she doesn't recognize them for what they are. The innocent conversation, the lingering glances, the way her heart beats just a little faster when she gets a text from someone who isn't her husband. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon for decades. They call it the slow erosion of boundaries. One thought at a time, one small indulgence at a time, until one day she looks in the mirror and no longer recognizes the person staring back. So, why are some married women so easy to lure in? And more importantly, how do they justify it to themselves? That's exactly what we're about to expose. The unspoken void, why some married women seek external attention. The greatest marriages are partnerships. It can't be a great marriage without being a partnership. Helen Mirren. At its best, marriage is a deep, unbreakable bond, a union meant to withstand the test of time, trials, and temptations. But not all marriages remain as strong as they once were. Not every wife still feels desired, cherished, or seen. And this is where the danger begins. Most people assume that when a married woman strays, she does it because she's looking for an escape, that she's unhappy in her marriage. But the truth? Many of them aren't trying to leave their husbands. Many of them aren't even looking for another man. What they're searching for is a feeling they lost somewhere along the way. How marriage changes a woman's emotional landscape. Humans are wired for connection, and for most women, emotional intimacy is just as important, if not more, than physical connection. In the early stages of a relationship, this intimacy is intoxicating. The deep late-night conversations, the way he looks at her like she's the most captivating person in the world, the stolen glances, the teasing, the sense of mystery. It's a time of passion, excitement, and endless discovery. But as the years go by, routine sets in. Life becomes predictable. Instead of discussing dreams, the conversation shifts to, "Did you pay the electric bill? Don't forget to pick up the kids. What do you want for dinner? Did you call the plumber?" Deep connection is replaced by logistics. Romance fades into repetition. And worst of all, she starts to feel invisible. Dr. John Gottman, one of the world's most respected relationship psychologists, explains that the silent killer of relationships isn't conflict, it's indifference. Many men assume that as long as they aren't fighting with their wives, their marriage is fine. But that's a dangerous assumption, because in reality, indifference is far worse than anger. When a woman no longer feels noticed, when she no longer feels chosen, her subconscious mind starts seeking validation elsewhere. And sometimes she doesn't even realize it's happening. The dangerous power of external validation. A simple compliment from a stranger. A man who actually listens to what she has to say. A moment where she feels interesting again. It doesn't take much, because when a woman has spent years feeling unseen, a tiny interaction can feel like oxygen after suffocating in routine. This isn't about physical attraction alone. It's psychological. This is why even happily married women who still love their husbands, can find themselves drawn to attention from someone else. It's called the Coolidge effect, a psychological phenomenon that explains how novelty triggers excitement and desire. If a woman has been married for years, if every day looks the same, if every conversation feels predictable, then even the smallest taste of something new can feel electrifying. Not because she doesn't love her husband, not because she's a bad person, but because she misses the thrill of feeling wanted. The loss of identity in marriage. Another overlooked reason why some married women become susceptible to external validation is social identity loss. Many women, after marriage, start to feel like they are no longer an individual. They become someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's caretaker. Their identity shifts from who I am to who I am to others. Before marriage, she was an individual, a mystery, a woman with her own dreams, interests, and passions. After marriage, she is defined by her roles. The wife who keeps the family together, the mother who sacrifices everything for her children, the supporter who prioritizes everyone else's needs above her own. And while these roles are beautiful, they can also become restrictive. If a woman no longer feels like her own person, she might start seeking interactions that make her feel separate from her role. And sometimes that interaction comes in the form of another man, someone who reminds her of the version of herself she thought was long gone, the confident version, the woman, not just the wife, not just the mother. And this is where the lines start to blur. Part 3, the justification game, how the mind tricks itself. We've seen how a woman's emotional needs can become a vulnerability. But here's the next question. How does she justify it to herself? Because no one wakes up and thinks, I'm going to betray my marriage today. That's not how it works. Infidelity is a slow, slippery process, one that the mind justifies long before it manifests in real life. Because the truth is, guilt is unbearable, and if someone can convince themselves that what they're doing isn't really wrong, they no longer have to carry that guilt. So how does this happen? We'll break it down next. The justification game, how the mind tricks itself. The mind will always find a way to justify what the heart has already decided. Anonymous. No one wakes up and thinks, I'm going to betray my marriage today. That's not how it happens. Infidelity isn't a sudden decision. It's a slow, almost imperceptible. It begins long before any physical line is crossed. The first betrayal isn't a kiss. It isn't a hotel room. It isn't sneaking around. It starts in the mind. Because before a married woman steps over the line, she has already justified it to herself. Guilt is an unbearable weight, and the only way to make the weight disappear, convince yourself that you're not doing anything wrong. So how does the mind do this? Through a series of mental tricks that slowly bend reality. Let's break them down. Stage 1. The innocent justifications. At first, everything feels innocent. She tells herself, "What's the harm? It's just a little attention. I'm just talking to him. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not like I'm cheating. I just enjoy the conversation." She convinces herself that it's nothing. But here's the problem. The mind is a master of self-deception. If something feels good, but it goes against one's morals, the brain finds excuses to bridge the gap. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the mental tension that happens when our actions contradict our values. The tension is uncomfortable, so instead of stopping, the mind does something fascinating. It changes the narrative. She downplays her actions. It's just harmless fun. She shifts the blame. If my husband paid more attention to me, I wouldn't need this. She compartmentalizes. This has nothing to do with my marriage. It's just for me. Stage 2. Emotional infidelity, the invisible affair. This is where things get dangerous. Because most affairs don't start in the bedroom, they start in the mind. And the first betrayal, it isn't physical, it's emotional. She tells herself, "I would never actually do anything. It's just nice to talk." But talking turns into texting. Texting turns into late-night conversation. Late-night conversations turn into sharing personal struggles. And suddenly, she's telling him things she no longer tells her husband. At first, she doesn't see the danger. But there's a key difference between a normal friendship and emotional infidelity. A friendship feels open and natural. An emotional affair feels secretive and thrilling. She starts hiding her phone. She starts deleting messages. She starts feeling guilty, but not guilty enough to stop. Because at this stage, the mind rationalizes everything. She tells herself, "I deserve this connection. I'm not doing anything wrong. I just feel alive again." It's not like we've done anything physical, but here's the truth. The moment she starts keeping secrets, she has already crossed the line. And from here, things only escalate. Stage 3, the slippery slope. When boundaries disappear. There's a concept in psychology called threshold theory. It explains why people who swear they'd never do something eventually end up doing it. Because the hardest part isn't doing something wrong, it's doing it for the first time. The first time she sends a message she knows she shouldn't send, meets up with him just as friends, feels his hand linger a little too long, and doesn't pull away. That's the moment everything shifts. Because after the first time, the second time is easier. What once felt forbidden starts to feel normal. And before she knows it, she's in deep. At first, she still tells herself, "This is under control." But she starts checking her phone constantly, waiting for his texts, making excuses to see him, feeling a thrill she hasn't felt in years. Her husband is no longer the man on her mind. He is. And this is where the most dangerous justification takes over. Stage 4. The "I deserve this" justification. This is the breaking point. The moment where she no longer sees her actions as wrong. Instead, she sees them as justified. Her thoughts shift from, "I shouldn't do this. This is wrong. I need to stop," to, "I deserve this. I've sacrificed so much for this marriage. Why shouldn't I feel happy? Heike doesn't care about me anymore, so why should I stay loyal? This isn't cheating, it's justice." This is the point of no return. Because at this stage, the emotional connection she's formed with another man feels more real than her marriage. Her mind has fully convinced her that stepping over the line isn't betrayal, it's what she deserves. And once a person believes something is justified, nothing can stop them. What happens next? At this stage, there are only two ways the story ends. 1, she gets caught. 2, she walks away from her marriage. Because once her heart belongs to someone else, her husband is no longer her primary relationship. He becomes the other man, and the more time passes, the harder it is to escape. So why are some married women the easiest prey? Because they're not looking to cheat. They're looking to feel something they lost. And once they find it, walking away feels impossible. Not because they don't love their husbands, not because they're bad people, but because they've convinced themselves that what they've found is something they'll never get back at home. Up next, part 4, the breaking point, when fantasy becomes reality. In part 4, we'll break down how the first betrayal turns into a full affair, how the mind adapts to secrecy and deception, why most women believe they can stop but never do. Part 4, the breaking point, when fantasy becomes reality. The chains of habit are too weak to be felt until they are too strong to be broken. Samuel Johnson. Every story has a point of no return, a moment where there's no more just talking, no more it's just a friendship, no more it doesn't mean anything. The game is no longer a game. It becomes real. And the most terrifying part? Most women don't even realize when it happens until it's too late. Stage 1, the first step over the line, and why it's irreversible. At this stage, the emotional connection is already fully formed. She no longer just talks to him, she confides in him. She no longer just sees him, but there's still one line she hasn't crossed: physical touch. The moment she crosses this threshold, there's no undoing it. The first time she holds his hand, lets his touch linger, meets him in private, feels the rush of a stolen moment, her entire psychology shifts because physical intimacy changes everything. The science behind why the first physical betrayal is unstoppable. In psychology, there's a concept called behavioral momentum. It means once you start moving in a certain direction, it's nearly impossible to stop. The first time she lies about where she's going, the first time she makes an excuse to see him, the first time their bodies come into contact. At this point, her brain chemistry has already shifted. Neuroscientists have found that romantic and sexual attraction activate the same brain pathways as drug addiction. The dopamine rush of a new connection feels intoxicating, like a hit of something she didn't even realize she was craving. Her brain is now hooked Even if she tells herself this is the last time, she'll find a reason to go back, not because she wants to betray her husband, but because the feeling itself is addictive. Stage 2, the lie becomes a lifestyle. At first, lying feels unnatural. The first time she hides a message, deletes a text, tells her husband, "I was just with a friend," it feels wrong. She feels guilt. Her heart races when her husband asks, "Who are you texting?" She tells herself, "I can stop whenever I want. I'm in control." But can she? Not really, because once something triggers an emotional and physical response, it becomes a habit. And habits are hard to break. After a while, the guilt disappears. She becomes better at covering her track. She compartmentalizes so well, she doesn't even feel guilty anymore. She believes her own lies. At this point, she's living a double life. Stage 3, the shift. When her husband becomes the other man, this is the most dangerous shift in her mind, because at this stage, her marriage is no longer her primary relationship. Her husband becomes the other man. The real passion, the real intimacy, the real excitement, it's happening elsewhere. She no longer sees her husband as her partner, feels annoyed when he tries to be affectionate, starts seeing him as an obstacle rather than a priority. Her heart already belongs to someone else. And when that happens, there are only 2 ways this story ends. Stage 4, the inevitable consequences, how it all falls apart. There are only 2 possible outcomes at this stage. 1, she gets caught. 2, she walks away from her marriage. Let's break both down. Outcome 1, she gets caught. A secret life is never fully secret. And no matter how careful she is, there are always signs. At first, they're subtle. She starts being on her phone constantly. She loses interest in intimacy with her husband. She becomes more distant and irritable. But eventually, the signs get bigger. Maybe it's a text message left open. Maybe it's a friend who suspects something. Maybe it's her own guilt slipping through the cracks. Eventually, the truth comes out. And when it does, the damage is done. She never meant to destroy her marriage, but she did. Outcome 2, she leaves her marriage, but it's never what she expected. In some cases, she doesn't get caught. Instead, she reaches a breaking point. She convinces herself, "My marriage is over anyway. I deserve to be happy. He will never make me feel the way he does." So she walks away. But here's the brutal reality. Most affairs don't last, because the fantasy and thrill that made it so exciting, it fades. And once the fantasy dies, she realizes she destroyed her marriage for something that wasn't real, lost the stability she once had, was just a temporary escape for the man she risked it all for. She traded a lifetime commitment for a temporary high, and by the time she realizes it, it's too late. Final thoughts. The hard truth about why married women become the easiest prey. Why are married women sometimes the easiest prey? Because they're not looking to cheat. They're looking to feel something they lost. And once they find it, walking away feels impossible. Not because they don't love their husbands, not because they're bad people, but because they've convinced themselves that what they've found is something they'll never get back at home. And that belief changes everything. What's next? Next episode, how men can recognize the signs before it's too late. The early warning signs no one talks about. How to reignite attraction in a long-term marriage. The hidden behaviors that signal an emotional affair. This is Stoic Guide. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and never be blind to the game again.